I mean, you know, presentation, honey. Why don't you just fall in love with me?
Hi, I'm Mickey Down.
And I'm Conrad K. And we are the creators of HBO's Industry.
And we're in the IndieWire office in New York City, about to record the Filmmaker Toolkit podcast.
Season 1 and 2, so anchored to your peer point. Feels like one of the big changes here is the ability to move away from that office to a certain degree, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that was sort of the mandate when we started writing season 3, that we wanted to expand it. And there was a few different reasons. There was a practical reason that I think, honestly, people had no idea how Peerpoint fit into the wider economy, the wider world. People didn't even know they did. So we really wanted to show actually how finance sat within the wider ecosystem in the UK of media, politics, how actually an IPO worked, what a company would do. We'd never been in an actual company that Peerpoint was bringing to market before. Everything was always through that lens, especially in season 1, which was so narrow in its field of vision. It was just literally subjected to the graduates. We were never on scenes without them. The first time we ever broke away from the perspective of the graduates was episode 7 of season 2, when we had a scene between DVD and Adler. And we thought, okay, wow, we can show other people in this world.
It helps the storytelling,
yeah,
unbelievably.
It really does. And people understand what's going on. So yeah, in season 3, we just thought we wanted to expand the world.
And also from a practical point of view, we just I don't think we didn't know what the limits of our ambition was in terms of we didn't know how big a canvas. I think we were a bit intimidated when we first started writing the show because we were very green. We didn't have very much experience. We were a little bit intimidated by the thought of breaking what Mickey was talking about, the kind of hermetically sealed, because a lot of the experiences in the show, especially in the first season, were kind of quite authored from mine and Mickey's experience in that world. So to do something that felt a little bit more ambitious felt like I don't think we felt like we had the capacity to do it yet. And as the show has evolved, we've kind of evolved as its creators. We've got a little bit more confident about the stuff that we feel comfortable writing about.
It's got to be a budget thing too, right? I mean, I assume
Budget's been the same every season.
Yeah. Really?
We get a 5% uptick every season, which is usually in line with inflation. So I think the budget's actually lower for season 3. But we're just better at spending it now.
Really good HODs who kind of milk every dollar as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I say because I saw this. There's a quote here. You're talking about expanding. This is I think Conrad talking about the season 2 finale. When we made season 1, Mickey and I were scrambling and in the dark for what the show was about. When we got to season 2, we thought it would be retroactively make us a better writers if we felt like we were speaking to season 1 more. And we had a list of threads we didn't want to leave behind, and it would make us look amateurish. It's funny because season 2 finale is fantastic, coming back to that Harper storyline. No, but when I read that, you two are completely different writers than. Am I not wrong about this? Is this not this? It feels like you're completely unleashed, in a way. Like the psychology of these characters is what continued in this world.
100%. I mean, that's basically you saying we understand how to write serialized TV.
It's a very long-winded, boring quote. That basically
But that doesn't seem like the people that wrote.
No, honestly, I think. Look, as Conrad said, just to his point about our confidence as writers growing, I think we did, season 1 was 8 hours of vibe. It was a basically YA show within a quite interesting world, a world that we had experienced and we could feel that we could render authentically. But then but it had no story, really. I mean, I rewatched it recently and it's, the story actually starts going at about episode 5.
Yeah.
Primarily because we wrote the first 2 episodes kind of in a vacuum while we were waiting to get the show picked up. So the first episode is Harper, second episode is Yasmin. They don't really have any correlation with one another. So when we actually finally got the show picked up and we were in episode 5, we started writing episode 5 at that point, I think, and that's when we started this sort of serialized engine of Harper and Eric and Harper being locked in the room and all that stuff. But then season 2, we thought, okay, we have to show that we can write 8 hours of TV with a story. So all the characters were in their different tram lines. They all had their different mentors. They all had their different stories, but there was no connectivity between them. And I think actually we overcorrected a little bit in terms of what we like to write about, which is kind of or the way we like to write, which is a kind of a quite punchy way of writing, where we just throw everything at the wall and try and make each other laugh and trying to explore things that we find interesting. Season 3, we just thought, okay, HBO have the confidence in us now to allow us to just kind of get away with as much as we get away with. Let's throw everything in the wall. We don't know if we're going to come back, so let's just use our best ideas and burn through them. Try and make it funnier. Try and make it feel, as you said, more expansive.
Make every episode feel really distinct. Like really, I mean, I don't think why HBO were really on board with season 3 in terms of our professionalizing ourselves as writers is that the plot proposition of each episode is very, very clear. The first, they have quite a strong rule about like within the first 5-10 minutes, like what is this episode about? Why are we watching it? What is the narrative momentum of it? And I think those are just things that we had to go through the process of. We had to basically make, and I know it sounds ridiculous, but we had to kind of make 16 hours of TV to just like metabolize that into our bodies and not have to overthink it too much. And then suddenly it's sort of like, I don't know, just like we just kind of, I think it's a ridiculous thing to say because we're making an HBO TV show, but we sort of learn on the job.
It's interesting too, because in this season, when you do go and do, like I'm thinking of episode 4, there's this wonderful storyline going on with everybody, but then to now when you do a beeline into a story about just one character, it's almost like that guy that we've wanted to know more about. Like, I wonder if you could talk about Rishi and...
Yeah, I mean, look, he was a character kind of born out of jokes written after the initial script was written. I mean, like, he felt very real to that world. He's based in part on friends of ours that were in that business. He was a bit of light relief. He felt like an authentic version of someone that was on a trading floor. And then when we got into... Again, like we were terrified. We didn't have enough. The show wasn't funny enough. The world didn't feel real enough. It didn't feel experiential. So we wrote all these jokes for him, ADR jokes, which we just slotted in through recordings that he did. And his character came to life in those moments. And suddenly he
found his voice.
Yeah, he was a funny character behind the scenes. Season 2, we brought him more to the fore. He says some of that stuff in meetings, but still he was kind of a secondary character. He's obviously fed into the last couple of episodes a bit more, but he was
peripheral,
still,
really.
Still peripheral.
Yeah.
Season 3, we just thought, look, we trust Saga. Saga Radi, who plays him, really grew as an actor between all these seasons, got his confidence up, and we thought, good, look, it's the 20th episode of Industry, the 4th episode. It's going to be the quintessential episode of Industry, but it's all going to be about you. Do you think you could handle that?
We wrote a note at the top of the script to basically say, like, for HBO when they read it, we're like, this is the 20th episode of Industry. It's going to feel like a sustained panic attack. All of the most high octane moments of the show, can we sustain that for a whole episode? It was almost a kind of like challenge to us as writers.
And it was about seeing, a character that was a bit of comic relief. Also, it was about let's try to explore a few things that we're interested in through this character, which is like, how do you end up being like that on a trading floor?
Well, because one of the joys of being on that trading floor is there's like, when they're in the midst of a trade or there's like a sports type thing going on there. There's this, and he's a big part of that. And what's interesting here is now to take that sports metaphor and go with gambling. Do you know, it's like, and now it's this idea that, of course, the guy that's the best trader, I imagine that's something you guys saw. There is something addictive. There is something gambling about this.
Yeah, definitely.
Buzz.
Yeah, it's definitely a buzz. There's adrenaline, especially in his position, you get addicted to that kind of energy and that,
sense of constant stakes being put in front of you and hurdles to be cleared. And I think it is very addictive. I mean, we sort of we sort of built a whole story into like, and maybe a bit of an obvious metaphor, but the idea of him like actually literally going to the roulette table, having like a horse syndicate, all this stuff sort of spilling out into every area of his life. And it's kind of like he's one of those guys who the world has to be gamified all the time for him to understand it. There has to be a constant sense of winning and losing, and I think he finds a lot of his sense of identity in being up, which is like what a lot of traders feel like. They bring that into their bodies, and then they carry themselves like a peacock, like a big alpha. And like we were trying to that thing Mickey talked about that we see in our friends, this sort of performative masculinity. We were trying to like in that episode subtly trying to like undermine it, interrogate it a little bit, and as Mickey said, sort of does the institution beget that sort of person, or does that sort of person is attracted into that institution? And is it really important actually what that distinction is?
He's reflective of a lot of the things in the show which he's never really had to have consequences to his actions until the end of the, he has a huge consequence in episode.
Yeah,
in episode 8. But after that point,
he's got a couple one too. Also,
Yeah,
when Hunter dresses him down too. It's just
yeah, he gets away with it constantly, and it's like as Conrad said, it's a pretty tortured metaphor, but like that idea of a gambler's mentality, which is like as long as you're winning, you keep going back for more until the point where you've lost everything. And I think actually, if we were to come back and to do a season 4, where we find Rishi having had that, the most acute consequence of his life, it would be really interesting to see how he actually.
We also he's got the gift of he's talks himself out of every situation. Everything is kind of everything's digitized. He's always talking to Rob about the fact that no one's holding the money, like all this sort of stuff. We were really interested in what it would look like if life was no longer an abstraction for him. It was something so final, something he couldn't talk his way out of. Felt like the right ending point for him.
And then when he comes back and he makes was it on the Sterling trade and he's gambled it all, you just see it in such a different light.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And I don't know if this is a good jumping off point. I'm very curious, but Harper says, I think she asks us a couple times in this season, am I a sociopath? Do you think I'm a sociopath? And I'm thinking about this in context of how bare you laid these characters. Is their psychology something you've kind of diagnosed and thought about, mapped out, or is it something you're kind of discovering, like we just talked about? I mean, obviously Rishi is a character that grew, but I'm wondering how much of this is that because there is a mentality of what it's like to be on that floor, which you both have clearly thought about, but as it relates to them, I'm wondering, how much have you diagnosed them? Have you thought that through?
No, I think it's as you said, it's a journey of discovery. It's trying to constantly ask the question, which Conrad proffered a second ago, which is is this an environment that begets this kind of behavior and psychology, or are people like this attracted to this environment? I think it's probably
we talk about that all the time, but we don't map it out in terms of it's not like we're Harper is medically a sociopath, and these are the tenets of a sociopathic behavior, and we're going to make sure that she makes a sociopathic choice here and all that sort of stuff.
And that's the reason I asked, is because there is something very clear here that running throughout this is that how hard it is to have personal relationships that don't become transactional.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the reasons I wonder, as we start to learn more about these characters and they're laid bare, I'm wondering,
That's a really good observation, because it's the thing we talk about a lot.
Yeah.
And so that's our conversations about psychology always start from the point of these characters. Is vulnerability and is that even achievable for them, or is it something they've just blocked out and compartmentalized in order to be successful in this business? And I think actually in season 3 we start to push some of them towards the idea that actually, if I was to open myself up, I could. There is a possibility of a human relationship.
Well, I think one of the brilliant aspects of season 3, and also one of the most heartbreaking, is you kind of are taking two things here. One, that transactional element, it's near impossible for them to not have these relationships. And you're using the TV convention of maybe one of the greatest ones I've ever seen of will they or won't they with Yasmin and Rob. And then it's just, that feels, of course, we're going to talk about Yasmin's the boat and the backstory and stuff, but it feels like that became a powerful combination where clearly I think the audience, it'd be good for, we kind of would like to see Rob writing a TV show and get the hell out of this world like you two. but I do wonder though, that seems to be like a big structuring thing of obviously an audience expectation of wanting them, and then
that sort of trope, I mean it is a trope, is the sort of thing that in season 1 we would have been very afraid of, right? Because we were coming in and we were we're writing something for HBO, we're very green, and we wanted to be kind of quite iconoclastic and be these TV conventions, they don't really apply to us. We can do something slightly different, which was very naive, and is why season 1 ended up being a bit more, me and Mickey talk about it, as a bit more of a punk rock record than a proper record. So but why? Will they? Won't they? Well, of course it's a trope because it's magnificent. It plays magnificently well. Why? Why to show a bit or a mystery element in the show that we'd around Yasmin's dad. That was stuff that I think we were so afraid of being cliche that we didn't want to lean on what you'd think of the more conventional storytelling. But when that conventional story is the bedrock of what we're doing, then all of the stuff that me and Mickey love, character, dialogue, all that sort of stuff, you can build a much more safe house. We had an executive at HBO who, when she was reading our scripts for the first time in season 1, she was like, "You guys are incredible interior decorators, but you have no idea how to build a house," which I thought was a really good way of saying you guys can do character and dialogue, but like you guys have no idea how to tell a story. So, and I think leaning into
structure a season.
structure a season. So I think those conventions, like I think they sort of made the season 3 pop in a way.
They're earned though, but 3 seasons.
Yeah, for sure.
I think look, we again, this goes back to another thing that we learned off the back of season 2, which is the shows. Obviously, the show is really good when it's frenetic and there's a ticking clock, but the show also is really good when it's finding intimacy between the characters. And that's just something that I think season 2 feels quite cold, because this is us being diagnostic on season 2, but it's cold because they're never, those like core characters are really never in a room together. They usually
that was a failure writing.
Failure writing. They spend a lot of time with their older mentors, and not enough time with each other.
Also, the spectre of COVID really lingers over that season. Like when we go back and watch, like we've gone back and watched it, and we sort of vacillate quite a lot between season 1 and season 2 in terms of which one we prefer. But season 2 now, when we go back and watch, it's like there's a really sad tone underneath the whole thing, and it's grey and it's just bleak. And I think it was because we were literally writing it during a pandemic, like coming out of a pandemic. We were doing, a whole writers' room was on Zoom. Like me and Mickey were together in a house in Somerset in one box, and all these other writers. And I don't know, it feels a bit alien in some ways, not very alive.
I mean, I enjoyed season 1 and 2 quite a bit. I've actually started to rewatch 3. I'm blown away by what you did, and looking at where this ends up with Yasmin, and seeing now, rewatching it and seeing how this was layered in is I mean, the end of 5 when they're just in that. I mean, the things that I actually wrote down the dialogue. I was blown away how much that paid off. But I would love. Let's talk about, since I just gave that compliment, where in the season 3 development, or maybe is it something that you had in your back pocket, Yasmin in the boat and the dad? Is that something? Because I mean, clearly this then is something you have to go back and structure all the way in. But when did that come along?
Pretty early on. I mean, like it started really the shift or focus change more into Yasmin was born out of the end of season 2. And the fact we had written ourselves into a bit of a corner by firing Harper. And we thought, okay, look, there's a version where we just simply, we sitcom this and it's reset, and oh no, your transcript's here or something.
Yeah.
And then suddenly Harper's back at the bank, and then we did the same story between her and Eric, and her foot's on the accelerator again. And it just felt like we would be just treading old territory. And Marisa, who plays Yasmin, is a fantastic actor who we just didn't give enough to, quite honestly. She spent, we joked that her season 2 arc was really just falling in love with her older boss and
having sex with her.
her.
Shouting at Kenny.
Yeah, and that was it.
Her dad.
Like stuff that could have happened in one episode that took 8. So we knew we wanted to do a bit more with her. We were fascinated by her relationship with her father, which we laid the groundwork for. And actually, I can't remember what episode it is now. Her sort of come to Jesus moment with him. Episode 8.
Yeah, episode 8, season 2.
Season 2, they had that conversation in the bar where he's like, look at yourself, look at everything I've given you. You think you've created this life for yourself, but like everything you have is because of me, including your job. That dynamic just felt really rich. So we wanted to do more of that. And then, I mean, we knew we wanted to talk about her dad. We knew we wanted to have this sort of voyeuristic spotlight on her for the press. The idea to actually dramatize that stuff happened. It happened actually. I think it actually happened after we were in the first episode, or we've done an outline for the first episode.
Yeah. Because
we said we wanted to start the show in a completely different place. We wanted the audience to just sort of really lean in, and we thought, okay, well, if you start on a boat and you're kind of totally at sea about where Yasmin is and why she's on there, and like it's called the Lady Yasmin, and she's surrounded by these people doing drugs, and like her dad is, having a sexual escapade with the deckhand. Like you're thrown in the deep end. And then out of that, we thought, okay, we've got this press thing, but we have to will people really feel the weight of her father and his influence on her and what happened on that boat if we don't see it? And we thought, okay, we have to see it. So we sent an email to HBO entitled Coke and Boats and said, do you want to, this is our idea for showing these flashbacks. And they really liked it.
Part of the challenge as well, like, in terms of the writer's room, like we wanted to level up again. Like we've never done anything with timeline in the show in season 1 and 2, and we were like, how can we how can we disseminate the information for maximum impact, like the end of episode 5 where she finally says what she did. Well, she says what she witnessed, and it was interesting because like we had to bring a few of the producers on board with us because they were like, well, why don't you just can we not front load this? Why are you parceling out over the season? Why are you keeping Harper's revelation on the boat to the end of 2? Like, and we actually just like, because we felt emotionally that those scenes were going to have way more impact the way we doled them out. And I feel like, I don't know, it's one of them. I think episode 6 is one of the more successful episodes of the season in terms of how it clicks everything into focus. And I mean, also like Adam Levy, who plays Charles, is a terrific actor. But like the show, people talk about the show, they always talk about the ambivalence of the characters. They talk about how can you root for any of these people? They're all sort of borderline evil. And me and Mickey say, well, there's humanity in all of them, and we're trying to get that out. I think Charles is the purest thing that the show has ever had to an actual monster. And because Adam played him in a very human way, and like very like you can almost when people pulled that scene that Mickey was talking about in the bar, some people are like, oh, I kind of see his POV. So like we're always trying to write his version of events. But also we were trying to like show how Yasmin was totally disfigured by this one guy in her life. How she's sort of processing her own trauma as well. She doesn't quite remember what happened in her childhood. And it was about the slow drip feed of that felt far less melodramatic and far more interesting to us than sort of front loading all of that stuff. And that was that's the process of writing through 3 seasons as well. Because it's not like we sat in the writer's room years ago and said she has this relationship with her father, she was potentially abused, she was sexualized, she was all of this stuff was stuff that we developed through conversation season on season. Considering what happens on that boat in that last scene with Charles, I have to imagine a lot of this is faith in the actress too, because there's a world in which that scene doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm saying? There's a world that to get to that choice or the lack of a choice. That's something where, forget about if you had planned it. I don't know that you do it without the horse, so to speak.
Look, that we were trying to figure out how story was going to end, and I think that was the first idea we had because we just had trust in Marisa that she'd be able to put
what are we talking about?
The fact that she doesn't help him.
Oh, of course, yeah.
It's all done in looks, really. I mean, it's quite hard to. A lot of the scenes in the show, I think, wouldn't work without the talent of the actors because they make everything feel so authentic and real. And it's all that stuff. I think that argument could feel really melodramatic without the talent of those 2 actors. Harper's addition on the boat was actually a later thing as well. The fact that she was on there, and I think that actually unlocks one of the best moments or best, I guess, episode structures in the series, which is episode 6. We're just showing the moment between Harper and Yasmin when they were totally vulnerable with each other and actually had the promise of a real relationship and was not transactional. Harper was saying, "I'm going to help you this because you're my friend." That sounds trite, but it's a pure.
But both with Rob and Harper, though, it makes that so heartbreaking is the intensity of what happened with the dad. It's like that's, and the fact that scene, it's brutal. That one I won't rewatch. The Harper Yasmin scene where essentially what earns the slap is Harper repeating what her father said.
Correct. Yeah.
That's, you like to do that with those 2, see how far they can go and
push
it.
we joke about when we rewatched that scene, obviously because we've rewatched it dozens of times because we edit it. But that scene, we joke, it feels like they've just said the most horrible thing they could possibly say to one another, and then they just say the worst and even worse thing, and it keeps going.
Just when you think it's going to stop, someone says something even more cutting. We never thought about it. It's funny, that scene's obviously quite long. We never ever even had a single conversation between us or the editor or HBO about cutting a single line from it.
I want to cut forward too, because obviously the dad is such this presence and such a psychologically defining thing. I think maybe my favorite scene in the whole season is Yasmin and Henry's uncle, which is such a key moment where it feels like maybe the inverse of this, where this is what she needed to hear, the exact opposite. I wonder if you could talk about that, because so much rides on. We don't realize it at the time. It's a lovely scene, but how much rides on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a few different permutations of that scene and that sequence, which were basically around what she was getting from them, and there was a version where actually that we cut because there was a version where actually the sort of wolves of Hawanani publishing had already been pulled off, and she actually she didn't have that sort of financial pressure, and she then still made the decision to go with Henry and his family because of that scene of his uncle being like, this is the first time I've actually felt welcomed within the family, and I feel actually that I can be vulnerable with this person. And we made it slightly more ambiguous, I think, by taking away that scene, because it still feels, even though it's
the fact that she doesn't need his press.
It's a heartwarming scene between two characters that are, I mean, they're not always the warmest characters or behave very well, but they're I think it's more interesting in the fact that it could still be seen as transactional, because he's embracing her, bringing her into his bosom, and she's hugging him back, but still, if you do this thing, I will give you all these things.
We called him the, like, what do we call him? The sort of the toughest, or like the best wingman.
Best wingman.
He was constantly nurturing Henry's love for her. But like we found him.
He's the matriarch of the family that doesn't have one.
Exactly. Well, we found him a really interesting character to write, because in some ways he's like the seat of total power in the show. Like there's a version.
He's the Murdoch.
Exactly, he's the Murdoch, and there's a version of that character which has absolutely no empathy, no capacity for love. You know, that's the poor TV version of it. And we were kind of, Andrew is he's a very avuncular, warm character. So there was that constant tension in terms of what the audience might assume about that person and what we're trying to kind of undercut. You know,
that is another point where the actor sort of directs the way we write.
Correct.
I mean, because in the first episode, when you first meet him and they're playing fives downstairs in this basically dungeon, he's a lot more intimidating.
Much more.
He's in the way we've shot it. He's in shadows. He's basically saying to her, he's threatening her to come, to reveal her dad's hiding place so that he pulls the press off her. But by the end, as we said, like, he's this sort of like avuncular, charming.
We should probably stop hanging out with the actors between takes.
Exactly.
Because you're totally right. It did change the way we wrote.
It's much more interesting though. I think it's like, because this guy obviously he's making these. He's rewriting headlines. He's directing the way that power works in the United Kingdom. He's in charge of all this.
From up above.
Exactly.
You could see him like.
But he's also just a family man with daughters, and
sure.
He's in some ways he's been thrust into a life that he didn't really ever want as well. And he's as he said, he's fiercely loyal and protective of his family.
I should mention, since we're talking about episode 8, you two directed your first episodes with 7 and 8, so we'll fold that in here. But I have to ask. He says this line of, what does he say? It's the family you choose. He's made his pitch, basically. Come. But then he's kind of like, and you're sitting there, and as an audience member, you're like, Rob. And you gave it to us. He gave it to her. And I'm curious, I have to ask, when did she make... Did she?
We talk about that.
Yeah, it's a very good
When
question.
did she make that decision? Was it after Rob walk, or was it? Is this something that was in that room? Because clearly, so many thoughts are going on in that room with that uncle.
It's not a very good answer, but I think the audience has to make their mind up a little bit on that.
The reason I brought up the directing is because you leave it off. You know, you clearly
because
leave
we
it
can be
mission.
very clear about it. But I think I think it's fun for the audience to basically make their mind up about.
We also, correct me if I'm wrong, man. Maybe my memory is terrible, but like me and you didn't. It's not like we came down that hard on that. On that decision, is it, in terms of when we were directing the actor?
No, I mean we didn't, and obviously she asked as well. But there was a scene another scene we got rid of, which actually I think made it a bit clearer about when she made the decision, or at least when that decision was not set in stone or punctuated. There was a punctuation point, which is after they had sex on the bench. You realise that the bench they're sitting on was a dedicated bench from Henry's father, and she sort of looks at it and the dedication and sort of starts to think about everything.
Yeah, and the way in the cut that everyone's going to see, the way Marisa, the look on Marisa's face, I think tells you that decision is that. I mean, you've whatever happened before in the interim and the walk and the sex, that decision is definitely made. I mean, it's
been made.
It's been made by the time they've finished having sex, I think.
Yeah.
I found I can't tell you how emotional I found all of where you all went with this. the fact that with 8 you did go a little into the forward, and I'm curious. I saw also a comment. I'm sorry to bring back your season 2 quotes here, but there was a thing here when people were asking you about that idea to go back to the Harper, the diploma thing, and you made this point is like you don't know if there's going to be a season 3, and you got to write the end.
Yeah.
Is that what you carried into episode 8 with season 3? Is that sense of like you just in case? Clearly, there's a lot to do here. I'm not saying I can't believe I would be shocked if HBO didn't give you season 4, but with where you go into that flash forward, was that what in the back of your mind?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you want the finale to act as a satisfying conclusion if the show was to never come back. I think there's nothing worse than, and it doesn't have to be satisfying in that everything single story is wrapped up. It just has to be emotionally satisfying. And it'd be awful, I think, if we wrote like an enormous cliffhanger and then the show never came back. I think we just
in a way, but we did a kind of in extremis version. I mean, we literally like almost laughing at that very idea. We scorched the earth. Like,
yeah,
I mean,
we left the door open.
We left the door open, but I mean, like. It's satisfyingly final, I think.
To see Rob with a different haircut and to see him so much confidence and to such a good salesman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what's satisfying as well, because you leave him on this. It's quite a cynical ending film, even though it's kind of like punched the air in some respects, because he's finally. We spend the whole season toying with the idea that he's going to break free of this world. He doesn't know how to operate in it. He finally realizes that he's not going to even find romance in this world. So you think he's gonna leave, but then I think actually the moment where he realizes that it starts the journey towards that fuckboy haircut and his good salesmanship is that when he leaves the Lord Norton's house, he thinks back to that moment and their flashback where he talks to when Yasmin was saying that she's never fallen in love with anyone, and he thinks like, God, like I kind of wish I could be a bit more like that. I wish I should be a bit more.
That smile is really ambivalent. I think people pitch different things onto what that smile means as he drives away.
I wanted him gone. I wanted him out. The only thing that made me feel okay about the Henry end was he gets in that car. I was like, oh, finally Rob can go.
Yeah, and it's high
right industry or something.
But and he's in the VC office. And Henry's given him money.
Yeah,
it's mentioned.
Arch capitalist.
Yeah.
Another theme that was present, and I think largely through Gus in season 2, was this idea of, can these institutions, governmental or financial, be at all instruments for good? And with Gus, spoiler, the answer is no. I think that, but that was something with just his. I don't mean to say minor storyline, but just this little thing here. It feels like there's a conscious effort baked into season 3 with these ESGs and conscientious, what is it called?
Impact investing.
Impact investing. It feels like that was something that you explored, that you wanted to go for the jugular with in this one. And my understanding is on a issue that's pretty big in the financial world right now. I mean, you guys tell me, but I mean, it feels like
it's been an issue. Yeah, it's been. I mean, it's the show's obviously very contemporary. So when we go into the room, we're always talking about broad financial stuff that we want to write about. ESG has been has been an investment idea vehicle for like the last 10, 15 years. And then, lots of money had flowed into it. And in the last 5 years, people have been sort of unwinding that trade or whatever in terms of like trying to see through it a little bit. I think we always thought the show functions quite well when it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek, high-tone satire, like not too broad, but like we thought it was the perfect thing for us. People say we've got a bit of a cynical aperture on the world. It felt like the perfect thing for us to kind of send up and sort of try and interrogate from all the various sides. And obviously we came down quite hard on the version of it which says that most of these things are co-opted in a way that if they start out well, then the incentive, the profit incentive all but destroys them, however much people try and what does Harper say, make it a better world.
Mm-hmm. And as soon as it's all well and good to pursue this kind of ethical investment or social impact investment until it actually affects your bottom line. And that's when you actually have to just throw it out.
In that episode 5, after Luminite is gone, it's gone, the government's bailed it out, and you've had those government testimonies. It's a very conscious choice to go back to the inner sanctum and see the politicians, the financial people come to.
It's one of my favorite scenes.
But I mean that's something I feel like is is in a lot of the back of our heads that happens.
Yeah.
Do you know that these in one way or another are interlinked? But let's blowing coke together and talking about picking basically who's going to be the next chancellor, right? Like,
I think, look, it's as Conrad says, it's a high toned portrayal of that kind of world, but I think there's a lot of truth in that, in the way that business or government business is exercised in the UK. I mean, like, obviously there's backroom dealings, there's corruption in every Western democracy, but I think the UK, especially the last sort of 5 years in our previous government, a lot of, especially around COVID.
Like 12 years of
yeah,
Tories?
we're
14
years
yeah.
of Tories, but especially the sort of post-Brexit, post-Theresa May, that sort of Boris Johnson era, there was a lot of, and there was a lot of stuff born out of COVID, and it was in the spirit of being practical, but it was a lot of what happened because of that was lots of contracts were given to people, friends of friends, chums, lots of people who were not qualified to be in government were brought into government because it was seen as like cutting red tape. But what you actually have happen is just like friends were given positions of power.
That scene, it's my and Mickey's favorite scene in the season, or one of, but it's obviously very dark, and I think there's a version of it where people are like, this is way too heightened. It feels like a bit of like Illuminati kind of thing going on. But I think that kind of chummy, as Mickey said, conversational quid pro quo is like how a lot of government happens. A lot of this is what's on the table. Let's go and have a glass of champagne, and I'll tell you what are you going to give me for this, and let's make it happen.
To not have Henry feel like he is a stand-in for. I mean, I'm sure you're not going to tell me, but I'm sure there's some influences here. It feels like a big part of this is in integrating him so fully into the story, into the Yasmin story, and also getting a heavy hitter like Kit Harington, right? Like, I mean, because it feels like there's a version of which you could actually maybe even have those same scripts, and it doesn't play right.
Well, I mean, look, like Kit's involvement in it was, I mean, it was actually, I think he slots into the show really, like seamlessly. I think he was worried, and he spoke about this before, which is like he was nervous to come into a show which felt like an ensemble and had a pretty particular way of being, and he didn't want to overpower it at all. So I think he was very conscious of that. The character predates his involvement. We'd already started writing it, but he
changed again once we cast him, because he became. There's a version of that character which has none of Henry's kind of pathetic charm or kind of likability and vulnerability, and he like really drilled down on all that stuff, and I think made him far more three-dimensional than what we'd originally written.
My wife indicated that the pool scene worked better with him too. So
That makes sense.
He'd love to hear that.
Yeah, he would. He was doing a lot of squats.
Yes, he's extremely proud of that scene.
Here you go, Kit. You like her to piss on you. That's welcome to industry. Guys, I've loved it. I've always enjoyed this show. It's right up my alley. I was blown away how good this was, this season 3. And I mean, you're being very modest about the fact learning what you learned from season 1 or 2, but clearly, whatever lessons you learned, I mean, this thing is unleashed. I was blown. I'm not joking. I'm almost done rewatching it again. I'm real, and I didn't have the time for that.
That's really kind of you.
So I really was blown away. So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.